Good afternoon. We're about to commence with the hearing for Education and Economic Development. I want to begin by acknowledging that the chair of the Full Appropriations Committee, our chair, Ben Barnes, is also with us today. Okay, without further ado, the first agency budget hearing will begin with the Maryland Stadium Authority. We'll first hear a presentation from the budget analyst, Patrick Frank, and then followed up by the agency representatives, Michael Frentz, et cetera. Mr. Frank?
Stadiums. They also provide subsidies through the convention center, the Hippodrome, Pimlico. They're working on some capital projects there as well. So as they have a pretty broad portfolio, you can see the costs for fiscals 23, 24, and 25 there. They increased modestly. What the blue is in the general funds, that's mostly for the subsidies for the convention center, and there's also some debt service in there. The special funds are mostly lottery funds. They are a lot of debt service there, and there also is a sports and entertainment event program fund that gets some money. The non-budgeted funds, those are the proceeds from the bonds that are sold, and that's the construction money for things like Built to Learn and the city schools. And also, finally, there's a little bit in reimbursable funds for Project Core. On page 2, there are two legislative priorities that the Stadium Authority got last year. I'll just mention quickly. One is to facilitate nationally televised live sports, and another is for an economic feasibility study in Charles County. There are two deficiency appropriations in this budget that you should be aware of. First, there's about $2 million for the Baltimore City Convention Center. The state pays 2/3 of the subsidy, and it appears that more subsidy is needed in the budget. Also, $1.3 million is being taken out of the event fund. On page 3 is the pie chart that shows what the different spending is. I'm going to only talk about 4 different slices, I think, that are the key slices. First, that orange slice there, that's $53 million. That's the operations of the Stadium Authority. Without that, none of the other slices happen. A second key one is the blue special funds. That is about $201 million. That is debt service costs. Once again, that gives us proceeds. And with those proceeds, the non-budgeted fund construction is done. So that's a key slice for the projects that they do. A third one I'll show is the light purple one in the little block on the right. That's what I mentioned earlier. That's general fund for things like the convention centers, and then there's a little bit of debt service also. So those kind of 4 slices are the ones that really build the work for the rest of what the agency does. I'm going to skip pages 4 and 5, because what that is just a lot more detail about what I said. If you have any questions, please ask, but I won't go over all those numbers on those 2 pages. Similarly, pages 6, 7, and 8 are more context and provide more details about how the money is spent. I'll skip over them in the interest of time, but if you do have questions about anything, please, I'm here to answer the questions. There is, I think, one key observation that we have. It's on page 9. It is the Oriole Stadium lease. Just a quick background, in 2022, there was some legislation that increased the amount of debt that could be issued and the debt service annual subsidy. So basically, each team gets up to $600 million for the stadiums. The Ravens very quickly, within a matter of less than a year after the legislation was enacted, already had renegotiated and had a new lease ready to go, and that extended there by 15 years that they had for the Ravens Stadium, and that's moving along. And they actually sold bonds already for that, and so that project is moving along very quickly. The Orioles did not move as quickly, and that's what the rest of these next 7 pages are going to be about. Some details about that. And with the Orioles, I'll start with this $600 million subsidy. And what was interesting, when I found, I was able to. It's very difficult to find good data about this, and certainly aggregated data is very difficult to find. So it's very time consuming to research these things. But thanks to the Buffalo News, I was able to get some data about public construction subsidies for NFL stadiums built between 1998 and 2020. And there were 21 different stadiums that were built. What I did is I basically put them into 4 groups. And basically, if I looked at the median for the subsidy amount, and half were above the median, half were below the median. So either you're high or low subsidy. And the other thing is I got some data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis about the size of the metropolitan areas that the stadiums are in. And once again, I used the same criterion. It's either you're above or below the median. If you're above the median, you're a large area, and you're a smaller area if you're below the median. And what I found was interesting, and that is if you draw like a line at 40% and at 70%, what you'll notice is all but one of the teams that got a subsidy of less than 40% was from a large area. Similarly, with the 70%, only one team got a subsidy that was larger than 70% that was in a large area. So there seems to be some relationship between the size of your area and the subsidy you get. I thought that was kind of interesting and helpful. Then on page 11, I kind of talk about what the lease is for the Orioles. They did sign a lease, and it is a little bit different than the previous leases. And there's 3 areas I'll point out in this here. First of all, the Orioles are proposing that they do the operation and maintenance of the stadium. Secondly, another change that's different from what the Ravens have is that they'll get a $3.3 million annual subsidy for the lease in order to help defray costs of operation and maintenance. And finally, there's a ground lease is also proposed, and they also got naming rights, but I think 22 out of 30 baseball teams have naming rights. The Ravens have naming rights, so that's not a particularly unusual. But it is also was part of the deal. If you go to page 12, I put together a map because the first thing I noticed when I talk to people about this is even if you go to the stadium, once you start talking about lot A and this area here and that, it's hard the eyes glaze over oftentimes, and it's hard to picture it. So what you have in this map here in the north end is where the Orioles ballpark is, and the south end is the Ravens stadium. And there's 3 lots or 3 kind of areas that I kind of delineate in this map. The first is the kind of heavier line that wraps around most of the Orioles stadium. That is the area that is proposed to be a ground lease that the Orioles can develop. There are 2 other areas mentioned in the leases too. The first I'll mention is Lot A, which is just to the south of Camden Yards, and it's the striped line, and also there is a kind of a wraparound which is called south of Lee Street, which wraps around the Ravens Stadium, and those could be developed, but they would need to have agreement among the teams and with the stadium authority, so that is a bit further off if that were to be developed. But that could be developed, but a lot has to happen. It also has to be a master development plan for that has to be approved. Page 13, I take a look at the rent payments, and I was able to find one other team that has a similar situation and is leasing some public lands, and that is the Colorado Rockies. That lease is a little bit older than the Orioles, but they also, interestingly, they have a 99-year lease. And similar as the Orioles, the highest payments are early in the lease, and they go from 7.5 to 5 after from I think for year 11, I think 6 to 20, and then from 21 to 30 is about $1.5 million, and then it's I think $100 is what the Rockies lease is for the last 69 years. The Orioles lease would be that was proposed in the MOU would be $1.5 million, which goes after 5, and the 6th year goes to $50,000, and then $750,000 from years 31 to 69. So it's a curious structure to me that the revenues decline over time instead of increasing. But that was what was proposed in the MOU. Now, what happened with that lease, I'll talk about that later, because the lease is going to be a little different than the MOU was. I also want to mention one concern that we have, and that the team has addressed it, and we really do want the stadium to be maintained as good as it has been. And so we asked some questions about that. And the response we got from the stadium authorities is that they would still be monitoring the leasing. There is electronic monitoring that can be done now. There would be inspections as well. There were regular meetings. And so the Orioles also, the stadium authority also expressed concerns about that the stadium is maintained properly, and mentioned to me that they would do their best to make sure that it is. All right. So what is the lease, finally, to get to on page 14? Basically, the lease that was signed was a 30-year lease, but there were some amendments that could possibly change it. The first is that the team has the option. They still have to negotiate exactly what the ground lease will be. And the idea is that by December of 2027, those negotiations are done. And then if that is approved, then what would happen is the Orioles would get the number of terms that they could do. There would be a 30-year lease if they get the ground lease approved. The Orioles would not pay any rent, but the Orioles would maintain the ballpark, and they would get the funds that I mentioned earlier, like the safety and repair funds. And as mentioned, also the Orioles do get naming rights. Now, if there is no ground lease, then what would happen is then the Orioles have one of three choices that they could do. They could continue with the base lease that they have now, which is essentially the same lease as was before. They could continue with this base lease and reduce the term, though, to 15 years instead of 30 years. Or finally, they could execute what's called the facility use agreement. And the facility use agreement basically would require 30-year lease terms. And what the facility use agreement is, that's essentially the part in which the Orioles would maintain the stadium. So the Orioles will have the option, whatever happens to the ground rent, of whether they choose themselves to maintain the stadium or have the stadium authority continue maintaining the stadium. And that's kind of oh yeah, and just one other point I want to make is when they do sell bonds, the state law, and this is a very appropriate state law, that the bonds maturities cannot exceed the lease period. So the idea here is we do not want to pay 30-year bonds if the team leaves after 15 years and then have to explain why we're paying 15 more years on bonds for an empty stadium. And so the initial bonds, until there's the ground lease is settled, seems to me it was going to be 15 years at most. But that could change depending on how those negotiations go. All right, we do have, I think, 4 issues to consider. And we'd like to hear what the stadium authority has to say and how they're going to handle this. It's a 30-year lease at most. There are, if there's a ground lease, and there are some 2 5-year options also. So you're talking really about 69 years after this lease that the ground lease would continue. Another issue is what's fair market value the state should get if it's going to lease it, to make sure that it is getting what the land is worth. Thirdly, there is a parity that's always been between the Orioles and the Ravens, and what does parity look like under this agreement? And finally, there's some tax implications and local government revenues and things like that we'd like to understand better as well. And so just that pretty much is the bulk of the analysis. I think I mentioned what's happening with the convention center on page 16. On page 17 is kind of the balance sheet of the stadium authority, so you can see all the different projects that they're doing. And then the stadium authority was very busy this last year. It issued bonds for the Ravens, for minor league stadiums, for Blue Line corridors moving forward. And there is like I said, the entertainment fund is moving. So there's all details about all of that. Our recommendation is that it's non-budgeted. We concur with all of the actions. And with that, I'll conclude my remarks and take questions.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Are there any questions for Patrick Frank? Seeing none, thank you. We will now see this a very robust panel. I only have Michael Friends on here, but I know that Craig Thompson, the chair, is here, and I would like you just to introduce the full panel to us.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Vice Chair Harris, members of the committee. Also, we're pleased to have Chairman Barnes here. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to discuss the Maryland Stadium Authority. I'm Michael Friends, Executive Director of the Maryland Stadium Authority. Joining me today, as you said, is Chairman Craig Thompson, our Chief Financial Officer, Don Absher, Executive Vice President of Capital Projects Development Group, Gary McGuigan, and Terry Hasseltine, the Executive Director of Maryland Sports, the State Sports Commission. Jocelyn Grogan-Jones, our Vice President of Administration, was supposed to join us today, but she has been unable to due to a health concern. I want to thank Patrick Frank for the thoroughness of his analysis. We've received and reviewed that analysis and recommendations in advance of the hearing. We prepared written testimony and also a presentation, which you should have in your packet. However, we're in the interest of time, I believe we'll only respond to the issues that Mr. Frank raised. I think the first two are, I'm sorry. At this moment, I think Mr. Thompson would like to say a couple of words.
Well, thank you, Mike. I just wanted to give my greetings and many thanks to Chair Smith, Vice Chair Harris, Chairman Barnes, and the members of the committee. Very pleased to be here and look forward to any questions that you have, but wanted to make sure that I gave my greetings and thank you for your time.
So with respect to the question about the $250,000 television appropriation, Terry, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Inside of our presentation, it highlights the methodology in which we went about awarding the $250,000 in the amateur. We looked at it as the amateur and youth video and digital grant program. We treated it as a pilot program since it was the first time we received funds of this nature. We ensured that they aligned with the current grant programs that we have, which is the Michael Aaron Bush funds and the Youth and Amateur Grant Program, as well as ties to the Major Events Fund when and if necessary. We made sure that we looked at a demographic diversity of events that were selected in the process. We made sure that the overall audience, was representation of the entire state of Maryland, as well as the sports that we selected. And we also ensured that we provided resources to the complexity of the videoing and the shoot that was required to do the events in place. We evaluated everything from youth and amateur to scholastic to collegiate to international competitions in sports like kickball, Quidditch, which is the Harry Potter craze, soccer, basketball, football, equestrian, cycling, running, lacrosse, and many more. All grants went through our process of requests for funding in and around video, digital, and other things. And the grants range anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000, depending on complexity and the audience in which they served. And last but not least, we ensured that all this content that we are gathering and putting together, that we identified a group to help us, one, catalog it and put the content together, but also made sure that the legacy of it was a robust youth and amateur marketing video for the state of Maryland to show how robust the sports tourism industry is in the state, as well as to make sure that we showed Maryland as a world-class destination for sports, but that we also showed that sports was serving to all people, no matter race, no matter gender, no matter preference. So we made sure there was a full variety of activities in that opportunity.
Thank you, Terry. Gary, do you want to speak to the $125,000 appropriation for the Charles County Amphitheater study?
Yes, thank you, Mike, and good afternoon, everybody. So when the $125,000 was put into the operating budget last year, it was identified to study an amphitheater. And when we met with Charles County and were negotiating the MOU, it seemed like their desire is to study a sports, wellness, and entertainment center. So we could not proceed. The study has not started, but the county, I believe, is trying to fix that this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Now I'd like to introduce or address the recommendation on page 14 If operations and maintenance become the responsibility of the Orioles, DLS recommends that MLS develop managing for results standards. And we concur with this recommendation. Our approach to quality with respect to operations and management maintenance, should the Orioles take it over, is to ensure that they have the experience, tools, and resources to perform it in a reasonable and prudent manner. And as part of this process, the Orioles will have technology tools that will allow access to statistical information. So we're happy to report that meaningful indicators as part of our overall report to the General Assembly, if and when that date occurs. With respect to the issue, why does the state offer the team a ground lease exceeding the stadium lease period by 69 years? MSA and the Orioles agreed to an extension of the existing lease of the ballpark to afford the Orioles the time needed to conduct their due diligence as to potential development of designated parcels around the ballpark. Absent preliminary due diligence, which includes such things as market and environmental impact studies and design, architectural and engineering work, it was premature to enter a ground lease of development rights with the Orioles. As such, there is no ground lease at this juncture. Assuming that the team meets benchmarks established in the lease extension, then the duration, rent, and other terms of the ground lease will be subject to negotiations between the parties and all required state approval processes. With respect to the question, what is the fair market value for the cash flows lost if MSA offers ground leases? Really, to determine the net fair market value of the state of a ground lease to the Orioles, MSA would need to determine the revenue generating opportunities that would be lost at the time that the ground lease is entered into. For example, leases at the warehouse or Camden Station, parking revenues, etc. This prediction is complicated because any such loss may not occur for several years. In addition, we would need to determine the fair market value of the economic benefits to the state and city. For example, rent payments under the ground lease, revenue streams likely to be generated, such as various taxes. Given no knowledge of the planned projects that may come to fruition, there are too many unknown variables at this time to make a reliable forecast of these figures. We recognize, however, that the Legislative Policy Committee and Board of Public Works will expect such economic analysis to be provided when and if a ground lease is brought back for required approvals. The third issue, the state is required to maintain parity between the Orioles and Ravens. What does it look like if the Orioles can lease MSA's improved property? And secondly, could the Ravens opt into similar operations and maintenance arrangements as the Orioles? Well, the first of the question is related to the potential development rights of the Orioles. And if the Orioles proceed to exercise their right to development in compliance with all benchmarks and required approvals, we believe the Ravens would have the right to request an amendment to their lease to obtain a comparable benefit. And what that comparable benefit would be a result of some negotiation between the teams, between the team and ourselves. In response to the second question, if a form of the facility use agreement attached to the lease extension becomes an operative document between MSA and the Orioles, we believe the Ravens would have the right to seek an amendment to their lease to allow for a comparable operations and maintenance paradigm. And finally, what are the potential tax implications? The overall purpose of entering into a potential ground lease with the Orioles is to increase economic activity on the Camden Yards complex in the city of Baltimore, and thereby increase economic benefits to the city and state. However, MSA is not a taxing authority, and we can't impose property or income taxes in connection with the potential development. The tax implications and impact on state and local revenues remain uncertain due to a host of unknown variables. For example, the type of development, how much of the available site is involved, the value of a particular project. Once these variables are known, then the questions of tax imposition and implications are more properly within the purview of the State Department of Assessments and Taxation, the Controller of Maryland, and the city's Department of Finance. Thank you. If you have any questions on this or any other part of our testimony, we are pleased to answer them, in addition to any other questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Are there any questions? Delegate Anderton.
Good afternoon. Great job on the two leases. I have just a quick question. I'm pretty sure I already know the answer, having been at the lease signing, but just to clarify, the 600 million is a de facto, I call it a line of credit, basically. As you pull down from the 600 million, your lease is extended to pay for those bonds. And then as those bonds are paid down, they can go back and borrow more. from that and just kind of continue to go as a rolling over lease.
That's correct.
Okay, yeah. So I think that's really unique. And I think it's great because you technically don't have to go through another lease negotiation as long as this road continues. And I appreciate everything you're doing. I just wanted to be mindful that March 29th is coming up. That's 40 years ago. That's a date that has been burned into my soul as a child. It's one of my first childhood memories were the Colts leaving in the middle of the night. And so this organization here was created as a result of that. And I'm thankful that my children and grandchildren will never have to go through that. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're now moving to the Maryland State Library Agency. We'll have a presentation from Laura Hyde, budget analyst, and then from the agency.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Again, I'm Laura Hyde for the Maryland State Library Agency. We're starting on page 1 with the operating budget summary. MSLA's fiscal 25 budget increases by $4.2 million, about 4.2% to $103.9 million. Most of this is general funds. If you want to turn to page 2, under implementation of legislative priorities. So chapters 649 and 650 of 2023 transferred 2 programs to MSLA, the Baltimore City Young Readers Program and the Young Readers Matching Grant Program. And they require the state librarian to administer those programs. The act increases those grants, the matching grant program from $250,000 to $350,000. And in fiscal 25, in their proposed budget, both programs are budgeted under the agency. There's bold language underneath that, just asking MSLA to comment on the fiscal 24 funding for both programs and timetable for those awards for fiscal 24 and fiscal 25. Also on the bottom of page 2, MSLA has a proposed deficiency in the fiscal 2025 budget of approximately $215,000 for contractual services for renovations of 2 elevators at the Library for the Blind and Print Disabled, money for salary adjustments, including reclassifications, and a 1.0 contractual FTE for the Young Readers Matching Grant Program. If you would please turn to page 5. On Exhibit 1, this just shows you an overview of the agency's spending. You can see that the majority of funds are 50% are to public library aid, and that's about 52 million. And then library retirement is aid to local library employee fringe benefits, which is about $23.7 million. The state library network gets $21.7 million, and then the rest is personnel and operating expenses. If you would turn to page 6, Exhibit 2, this is the proposed budget change. You can see again that the budget for fiscal 25 is $103.9 million with $4.2 million increase. And if you look down under other changes, as stated previously, this change is primarily for library retirement, but also public library aid formula funding increases by $814,000, as does the net change in transferring those programs, and a fiscal 24 deficiency allocation for $419,000. And then there's 2 decreases of approximately $90,000 for the LBPT capital project, and then just miscellaneous operating expenses. If you turn to page 8, looking at the personnel data, you can see that MSLA's allowance is 33 regular positions, which is a gain of 1 position since fiscal 24. In calendar 23, the agency hired a management associate for the Maryland Accessible Textbook Program, a procurement officer, and a communications manager. And then in fiscal 24, the Young Readers Matching Grant Program, MSLA expects to fill that contractual FTE administrator position. Turn to page 9. Under key observations, Exhibit 3 shows library programs and attendance. This is one of their MFR measures. This just shows a slight increase from fiscal 22. But however, these outcomes haven't returned to pre-COVID levels, so MSLA is asked to comment on their efforts to improve in this measure. If you turn to page 10, Exhibit 4, This shows that digital materials owned and accessed between fiscal 19 and 2022. This is actually revised data showing fiscal 22 increase in both measures. And then looking on page 11, this is Exhibit 5. This is for the Library for the Blind and Print Disabled, patrons served and materials accessed. You can see that this shows an increase in both measures from fiscal 22 to fiscal 23. And DLS recommendation is to concur with the governor's allowance for MSLA. And this completes my presentation. I stand for questions.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions for the analysts? Seeing none, thank you. Now, for the Woman of Honor, this is a bit bittersweet. Maryland State Librarian Irene Padilla and team, we know that this will be your last time before us as you do, I guess, maybe the quick march to retirement. Well deserved after several decades serving the state. So I want to start with a thank you for your service. Quite notably through COVID, when libraries stood in the gap in many communities doing extraordinary work far beyond what your original charge and missions were. So I just want to say on behalf of the subcommittee, and I would say probably the full committee, we thank you for your extraordinary leadership. And we know you still have a last duty here to provide a presentation, but I just wanted you to know that.
Thank you so much, Chairperson Smith. We really appreciate that. It's been my honor to help establish the Maryland State Library Agency as an independent agency. And it's taken a little longer than I thought. I thought I would retire a few years ago, but I wanted to make sure it was up on its feet, and we're doing very well. So good afternoon, Madam Chair. Today is Donna Liberto, our Chief Financial Officer, and in the audience is Tim Pratt, our Communications Manager. We are here, of course, in support of our operating budget. But before we move forward, I want to thank Laura Hyde for her excellent analysis. As always, Laura, you do a great job. It's very thorough, and we concur with her remarks. So thank you. The Maryland State Library Agency, more commonly known as MSLA, administers state and federal funds to support Maryland libraries in their roles throughout their communities. And as an independent agency, which we've been for about 6.5 years, we've been able to do so much more. We've been working very hard to support the 192 public library branches and 22 mobile libraries throughout the state. But more things are on our horizon, so we're looking forward to the future. Maryland Public Libraries at this point have over 3.5 million registered borrowers. 55% of Marylanders hold library cards. In fiscal 2022, patrons borrowed more than 47 million items, and library staff answered over 3.5 million questions. So we're still out there, we're still doing our thing, and they know where to find us. In-person visits to the library buildings tapped 12 million, and library events had more than 1 million attendees. So we're very pleased. We are coming out of COVID very strong, and we think things will get even better. Many Marylanders rely on their library branches for access to computers and the internet. And there was a new ABLE Foundation report in 2023 that updated the one they did in 2021. And that report shows that 20% of Maryland households do not subscribe to broadband service. Now, this is actually a good thing in that last time we reported on this, it was 23%. 3% of Maryland households do not have a computer. It's better now because in 2021, it was 18%. However, more than 140,000 households with children do not have access to broadband. And that's an increase of more than 400%. So we still have a lot of work to do. And fortunately, libraries are now partnering with the state to promote the provision of free internet access through Governor Moore's Maryland Act Now campaign. And this is helping us tackle the digital divide, which is, it's hard to believe that we've been talking about this digital divide ever since there's been digital materials, but it's still going. It's so critical in this day and age to provide internet access for all of our customers, all of our Marylanders for education, day-to-day work, et cetera. And we are partnering with the University of Maryland's Extension School to address digital literacy and digital navigation needs across the state. So we are finding some partnerships out there. Meanwhile, public libraries are continuing to provide more than 5,000 computers for public access in each of our locations throughout the state, and free Wi-Fi at all branches. And in many communities via the mobile libraries, which we've increased dramatically, and the hotspots that are provided. Wireless internet use has increased to a record 12.5 million in the last year. As pointed out in the information that Laura provided, a number of bills passed by the legislature. One of them was the Young Readers Program Expansion Act, which created a new grants program for us. This program helps subsidize the distribution of books through the Dolly Parton Imagination Library to more than 35,000 children throughout the state. The beauty of this program is these children receive a free book in the mail every month. What a wonderful thing for them. I would have loved that as a child. And it's so important to imbue in them the love of reading and the love of learning and prepare them to be ready for school. So we are working with the Baltimore City program piece of this as well, so that those children continue to get their services. We have established quite a few standards throughout the year, and this gets to the fact that we've been asked to comment on the program and provide a timetable for the fiscal 2024 and 2025 awards. And I'm just going to give you a quick summary. I went into more detail in the written response, but MSLA has hired one full-time contractual person who will begin working the end of the month. A young man just out of school, so we're very pleased. This is his first professional job, and he's ready to go. And the governor's budget proposes that this position be made permanent in FY25. We are working with the State Library Research Center. They have agreed to take on the ownership for the city portion of this program, and so we're very thankful to them for that. And we have been spending the time since this legislation was passed doing an analysis of custom surveys, focus group interviews, and looking at census data to establish standards for the program, and working with the county affiliates who are, as you know, all over the state, and holding meetings with them and trying to understand where they're coming from and what their needs are. We are working with, oops, I lost my place here. So we are looking to establish these standards to encourage the spending grant funds in high poverty zip codes, as well as identify potential affiliates in un- or underrepresented areas. And we hope to start the distribution of grant funds very soon. And next year we'll be soliciting feedback, working with the program in more fully, and encouraging especially the development of new programs throughout the state. Secondly, MSLA has been asked to comment on the reason for the fiscal 2024 deficiency allocation for salary adjustments, including reclassifications to support pay equity and non-competitive promotions. In keeping with Governor Moore's goals outlined in the plan for rebuilding state government, agencies have been asked to review staff positions for necessary salary adjustments, equity reviews, and non-competitive promotions for retention purposes. MSLA has been doing a lot of work in this regard. We find that in order to fulfill our mission, we must retain high quality, hardworking employees. And to do this and to make sure that they remain passionate about what they do, we want to make sure they're paid fairly. So we have been working on that as well. Finally, we've been asked to comment on the efforts to increase program offerings and attendance. Well, with library closures due to COVID having ended, we certainly had our work cut out for us, but we have so many great library directors and staff across the state who have just pitched in and that welcomed the public back into libraries and look forward to providing as many programs as possible. In addition, while in-person programming has been the cornerstone of library offerings, we've been able to do a lot virtually, and we're hanging on to that opportunity as well. So people don't have to come in all the time to see a library program. And the Library for the Blind and Print Disabled has taken this a step further. They've established a program that puts together podcasts of their training and other programs that they do and makes those available to people throughout whenever they want to view them. They've also increased the number of volunteers assisting with teaching one-on-one computer skills to people who are print disabled. So we're working together. We have included some new offerings. We have, as I mentioned, blog posts, social media campaigns, videos, and additional podcasts throughout the agency. And what we're trying to do is not highlight what we do as an agency. We're trying to highlight what the libraries do. And, that's where we really see the benefit, is looking for a wider audience for our libraries and all the hard work that they do and all their imagination and innovation. So in short, we conclude with the analyst's recommendation. Thank you so much for your support, your ongoing support of libraries and of our agency. And we are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Padilla. Are there any questions? Yes, Delegate Woolek.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for your presentation. I have just a couple of questions. The first one is, I'm just curious about the attendance. When you have it at 1 million, does that include virtual and in-person visits, that number, or is it?
Yes.
It is the total?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Would it be possible to get a sort of a breakdown of the demographics of that 1 million? I'm just curious, how many of our children, young adults? I work with that age group, so I'm just would love to get that detail.
Okay. We'd be happy to do that.
Another follow-up is about the Young Readers Program. My counterpart in my district had sponsored that Young Reader Program. And I was wondering if you have any more detail about the county affiliates and established programs, exactly what they are, if we could get that list, and how often you might be updating those.
Well, we do have a list of all the affiliates, and we have an approximate number of people they serve. So I can get you the latest update for that information if that's what you'd like.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And how often do you update those?
Well, with our new employee, we'll be updating them again very soon, I'm sure. But we just did really an initial sweep this summer, looking out at all the different agents or all the different affiliates. And we did that through a survey, and they responded to our questions. So that's what we have right now, but we need to verify that information, especially now that we're getting ready to go into the award stage of the program.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for your time, and we hope you have a good rest of your year. I know you're going to be pushing towards with June 30th. Is that your
June 30th
separation
at this
date?
point, although my board keeps saying, can't you stay a little longer?
We'll see.
We'll see.
We'll
That's
see.
what I say. Thank you so much.
Well, that concludes today's hearing.